100 years ago, the United States was hit by one of the most devastating and infamous tornadoes of all time, and that would be the Tri-State Tornado of 1925. It had a damage path of over 200 miles and killed nearly 700 people. And a century later, you know who still does not respect the power of these storms? Battletech. I know it's a bit of an odd segue there, but I could go ahead and make more videos making fun of space magic laser guns, but when it comes to science in science fiction, Battletech as a tabletop game can take things to really crazy levels because they have rules for meteorology. In this case, tornadoes. So let's do a little bit of show and tell with Jason. This is Battletech Alpha Strike Commanders Edition, but pretty much some similar set of rules is going to appear in most of the big Battletech books. I'm going to jump to page number 63 here, where it's the start of the tornado rules. And the first thing you're going to notice is that the tornado rating is F1 to F5 because they're using the Fujita Scale for some reason. Which of course makes you ask the question, hey, wait a minute, Fujita Scale, I know that. That's perfectly legitimate. It is if this video was 20 years ago. So everyone's probably familiar with the Fujita Scale. You can see it sitting out right here from the National Weather Service. It ranked tornadoes from a scale of F0 to F5, and even though it estimated wind speeds, it was really measured entirely by the damage the tornado inflicted. That is an important thing to note, that it's not actually from measuring the wind speeds directly. More on that controversy later. It was created by a Dr. Ted Fujita in 1971, and in fact, because of a Story of Michigan video I did years ago, I have downloaded a copy of what I believe is the research paper that the Fujita Scale was originally based on. If we go scroll to the table of contents here, you can see this is Dr. Ted Fujita talking about application of F-scale in tornado analysis, more stuff about F-scale for tornadoes, and there was even a section on applying the F-scale to the survey of hurricane damage, but of course that itself never quite caught on. Now the next question, you're thinking, wait, this was created in 1971, but I know of tornadoes going back a long time, including the Tri-State Tornado that have a Fujita Scale rating. Well, that's because Dr. Ted Fujita and a few other researchers went back through the past, taking some notes they had, looking at historical accounts of newspapers and things like that, and they essentially post-rated pretty much a bunch of tornadoes going back to the late 1800s something. There's a giant book on this if you really want to see all the numbers on the major tornadoes. But that's why old tornadoes have an F-scale rating. But then why, if the F-scale has been used for so long, why is it no longer valid for Battletech to use it approximately, this was 35th anniversary, so about 6 years ago? Well, that's because we flash forward to 2007, we have something called the Enhanced Fujita Scale. So the Enhanced Fujita Scale is what the National Weather Service in the United States currently uses. As you can see here, it's got kind of a similar rating. You have EF0 to EF5, and they correspond to estimated wind speeds. On the surface, the EF scale kind of looks like the F scale because you have a rating from 0 to 5, and those correspond to estimated wind speeds. Once again, we're still not measuring wind. We'll get to more of that controversy in a moment, I promise. But the EF scale essentially factors in a lot more modern understanding of how winds actually damage structures, and it's a whole lot more detailed. You can take a look here at the list of damage indicators that a meteorologist would look for in the field, and if you click on any one of these, you'll get even more detailed breakdown of what damage to look for and what the lower bound and upper bound winds that may have caused that. And it's essentially a supercharged, hyper-detailed version of what Ted Fujita originally came up with. So why I keep bringing up this whole lack of measurement of the wind speeds? Well, that goes back to what is another infamous tornado in 2013, which is the El-Reno tornado. In particular, this is very infamous because it was kind of a wild and unpredictable tornado in some ways, but probably more noticeably, it killed a number of prominent storm chasers. So if you look at the damage path of it for the National Weather Service here, you notice it has a maximum EF rating of EF-3. it kind of went back and forth a little bit, because one of the cool tricks that meteorologists can do today is they have mobile radar units that can get really close to tornadoes. And with this tornado, one of those mobile radar units measured wind speeds in excess of 300 miles an hour, which would technically make the tornado an EF5 by measuring wind speed. But the thing is, it didn't really hit a whole lot of solid structures, and therefore the actual damage it caused to structures was only an EF3 rating, and because of that, that is what the official basically strength rating of this tornado actually is. And you can see how that creates a bit of a controversy. And even to today, when there's more discussion about revising the enhanced Fujita scale to something else, should we factor in wind measurements, should we not, is one of the discussions that is currently going on. Okay, well, that was a nice brief history of how the United States rate tornadoes, but what about other countries? Maybe some of them still use the Fujita scale, and there probably are countries that do, but most use something else. Now, France has its own version that's a modified EF scale. Most of Europe, though, uses something called the IF scale, which is the International Fujita scale, which is a little bit different than the Fujita scale. And then over in the UK, and you've got something called the Toro scale, created in 1972, which I wonder if that was a response to the Fujita scale, but that's just me thinking in my head. Don't take that as any kind of serious factual statement. It's got a total of, I see 11 rankings of tornadoes here, but there's a reference to a T11 down here in the description, so that would make it 12 rankings. I don't know. Either way, though, what's pretty epic about this scale is their high-end tornado is called a super tornado, and that's pretty awesome. Take that, Dr. Ted Fujita. Okay, so let's get back to science fiction. Of course, Battletech takes place on other planets, and would the Fujita scale really apply to other planets or any of these scales? And the answer is probably not really. The meteorology of different planets is going to vary quite wildly. Density of air matters when it comes to destructive power of winds. Obviously, some planets might have better ingredients to produce even more powerful tornadoes, which you can get on Earth, and some may have even weaker tornadoes. Some with, like I said, with lower density of atmospheres. Tornado winds may technically be a lot faster, but less damaging. And then you'd have to really factor in the fact that construction of structures all over the inner sphere is probably heavily varied, and therefore the Fujita scale really wouldn't work for some backwater remote planet versus something that's in the core of one of the major houses of the inner sphere. And I have no idea what the clans use, so they're a crazy society. Probably, I don't know. I'm not going to try to take a guess at what they do. So then, simple question then, is why would Catalyst Game Labs use the F scale? Probably because that is what they knew when they wrote this book several years ago. Had this book came out this year, after the release of the movie Twisters last year, I think a lot of more people would be familiar with now the EF scale, because I'm pretty sure the F scale is pretty prominent back in the movie Twister when that came out back in the 90s, which was incredibly popular. So I imagine if they were to rewrite this book today, it'd probably be the EF scale, which would be a point in their direction. But then you have to consider the rest of the rules in regards to tornadoes, and they're pretty far off base from actual meteorology. Let's jump back to the book. So right now I'm looking at page 64 in the rule book, and one of the things I want to point out is that you actually use a 2-inch area of effect template for the tornado. So considering that 42 inches is a long-range missile, which we know is like 630 meters, that really means that 2 inches, I don't know, that's probably like a hex approximately. So that's like 30-meter radius, which that's really, really tiny. 30 meters seems really huge, especially when we're talking about really large tornadoes. One of the big reasons why the El-Reno tornado did catch so many storm chasers off guard was that the maximum path width was 2.6 miles, which is approximately, 4 kilometers? A little bit more than 4 kilometers. Granted, this is like the widest tornado ever, but 30 meters, 4 kilometers, 30 meters, 4 kilometers. Tornadoes should actually destroy pretty much the entire Battletech Alpha Strike battlefield. So your entire tabletop's just gone. Which in all fairness, probably wouldn't make for a very exciting game. How the rules work damage-wise is each turn you take a point of damage, which of course in Alpha Strike is quite a bit, for the F rating of the tornado, which means if there was actually an EF5 tornado moving across your Alpha Strike board, it would probably be 4 turns and the game is over. Thanks for playing. Everyone's dead. Okay. Then we can talk a little bit about tornado movement. I won't go into the details of the rules, but the basic gist is there's a lot of random movement to the tornado in the battlefield. And tornadoes can be unpredictable. Once again, I'm going to reference the El-Reno tornado. It did some things that were certainly unexpected for tornadoes. But if you look at most tornado paths, they're kind of generally in the direction that the storm is moving based on the winds that are pushing the supercell around, or the line of thunderstorms being pushed around. So the idea that a tornado is going to do zigzaggy stuff, that generally doesn't happen. There have been some damage paths where tornadoes loop back on themselves, but those are relatively rare. So random movement of the tornado is not exactly correct. So what you would use instead is probably have a single prevailing direction of the tornado, but then you have a little bit of variance each turn, whether that's kind of like left or right of the direction of the path, just to get a little bit of variety to how the tornado is moving across the battlefield. And also, like I said, make it a lot bigger. Even that would make the game kind of crappy. Finally, let's talk a little bit about what kind of damage an actual tornado would do to a battle mech. And of course, now we get into the kind of space magic stuff. But you know, we have some examples we can look at in the real world. We'll take a look at that in a moment. The reality is battle mechs fall over pretty easily. You get 2 magic electrical bolts punched to you and you got to make a paladin skill check. So I'd imagine most battle mechs, even the big boys with the 100-ton ones, would be thrown to the ground pretty easily. There is plenty of documented evidence of very large structures being destroyed. But let's talk about some actual movable things and what happens to them. And for that, we can look at a storm that happened in March of 1948. Actually, 2 different storms that are critical to the modern forecasting of tornadoes. And that would be tornadoes at Tinker Air Force Base on March 20th, and then again on March 25th. Now, meteorologists, when it came to the March 25th tornado, realized that some of the atmospheric conditions were very similar to what happened on March 20th, and they issued the world's first tornado watch. And that actually caused the Air Force to take some precautionary steps to hopefully minimize damage to the aircraft. And by pure crazy luck, their forecast kind of panned out. I shouldn't say total crazy luck, because there's obviously some science there. But the fact that the Air Force Base was hit by a second tornado just 5 days later was quite the confirmation of this earlier meteorological effort for forecasting tornadoes. But why I really want to mention this isn't so much the meteorology side of things, but the damage side of things. Now, this Air Force Base housed C-54 Skymaster transport aircrafts, as well as a handful of B-29 Super Fortresses. Is that what they're called? I think the Super Fortress is B-29. So when you're looking at the damage of these 4-engined aircraft, the C-54 Skymaster was 17 tons when empty. So we're talking, we're getting into the range of a Locust or a Stinger. Whereas the B-29 Super Fortress, which I'm pretty sure some of these are the B-29s, a few of them look like they have little gun turrets on the top, those were close to 33 tons when empty. Now we're getting into smaller, medium battle mechs, and these guys are just being tossed around like crazy. The damage to some of them is pretty catastrophic. And of course, someone's probably going to think, well, they're aircraft. Aircraft are designed to be moved by the wind. And my rebuttal to that is going to be the introduction to MechWarrior 4. Yeah, so that was a Cougar 35-ton So of course that is a 35-ton cougar struggling to stand up in what I would say would be some sort of shockwave of an explosion, but it definitely went on for a few seconds, so it's more of like some sort of weird epic wind blast. And I'm going to use that as evidence to say that battle mechs would not be able to stand up very well inside tornadoes. Now they wouldn't be lifted up and thrown around too much because tornadoes are not that strong, but as we know from the rules of Battletech, battle mechs don't like falling over and falling on things and falling off cliffs and rolling around and all that stuff. So yes, a tornado would jack up a battle mech pretty good, and it would be a very, very bad day for the mech warrior inside. Probably a fair amount of head damage. Alright, well that's about all I got for you guys today. This weird random Battletech science tangent kind of semi-joke thing going on. And I had this idea for this episode written down quite a while ago. And I'm like, I need to find an excuse to go ahead and release it. And when I realized that this week, actually, if you're watching this on the day the video was released, if I get it out on time, it will be the 100th anniversary of the Tri-State Tornado. I'm like, this is a good time to try to go ahead. Hey, look at another try. That's really bad. This would be a good time to go ahead and get this video out and try to get some of that nice trend jacking juice at all that really matters these days with YouTube videos. So if you wonder why your YouTube channel is not doing as well as you think it is, it's probably because you're just making super focused content, and YouTube, I don't think YouTube likes it anymore. But if you want to hear my opinions on the YouTube algorithm these days, I can go ahead and run my mouth about that someday if you guys really want me to talk about it. I think all I will say is the YouTube kind of flipped everything on its head sometime in the last year, year and a half, and it's changed the rules of the game, and I would like to believe I finally figured it out, but the last video didn't do very well, so I'm not entirely sure what exactly went wrong there, but something certainly did. So anyway, thank you guys all for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield, and I will see you next time for whatever crazy, random, bizarre script I'm going to choose from. I got about 2 or 3 here. I technically have another half a dozen weird ones, so I don't know, I'll come up with something. We'll see what's in the news and go from there.